Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Lindsey Lerner, and you're listening to The Cost of the Status Quo. More people than ever are questioning why they do what they do and forging their own path. And on this show, I sit down with these entrepreneurs, trailblazers, creatives, and overall awesome beings to discuss the ideas, the opportunities, and the overall tips and tricks they're using so that the rest of us can do the same. This is The Cost of the Status Quo. Today we're here with Sean O'Connor, an awesome human being who has been passionate about driving the use of public blockchain technology since 2017, and along the way has been teaching, mentoring, and advising others how to get started down the blockchain rabbit hole as well. According to Sean's personal website, which I love, he's a ruckus maker who is trying to make a dent in the world. Having interned with folks like Seth Godin and having become a Fulbright Scholar, I'd say he's got a thing or two to teach us. Today, Sean is here to share a bit about his story and the tips, tricks, and habits he's learned along the way. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. It would mean the world to me if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed this. Welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So take us back. What was it like growing up in New Jersey?
Yeah, I grew up in central New Jersey. Super fortunate to have two grandparents that live in New York, still alive today. And as a child, like roughly once a month, did a city weekend and would explore every single museum. And then conversely, my folks are in the restaurant industry. So grew up in and around that and start getting paid at the age of 12 for working there, doing 2 nights a week. And then throughout high school, even through college, my husband, the second time he met my parents was on a major holiday and they still own a restaurant and he got put to work that day. So I can't go home without like getting pulled into the mix a little bit.
That's awesome. That first restaurant was in Jersey?
Yeah, first restaurant was in Jersey. They sold that one, bought another one, have been at their new location for 6 years now. This is, I think, their 8th or 9th restaurant along the way. And so they've been doing this for a minute. And my brother and sister-in-law work there.
Oh, very cool. And do you think that had an impact on the trajectory of your life, seeing your parents really get into the hustle at 12?
Yeah, like growing up in a family-run business, you kind of realize how hard it is to build and scale a business, and definitely taught me that I didn't want to wait tables my entire life. And also like the people skills, digging into things like inventory, spreadsheets, like you just kind of get exposed to a lot that you should be taught in school, but you're not.
Yeah, all those soft skills that we don't know about.
Nobody teaches you how to file your taxes, and they are insanely complicated.
Without a doubt. And so post-Jersey, you end up going to undergrad in New York at Fordham, I believe, if I read correctly.
Yeah, I was that 17-year-old kid that had a spreadsheet for every college I applied to, estimated 1, 5, and 10-year salaries, and like the estimated debt load. And Fordham had the best ROI of any program I got into. I was like, I'll go be an investment banker for a few years after college, pay these loans off, and then figure out what I want to do. And Fordham had super strong pipelines into Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, which fell apart my first semester of my freshman year when the '08 mortgage crisis hit in earnest.
That was a hell of a plan until then, huh?
You know, the best laid plans. I kept doing it. Interned at a hedge fund, like did that thing, hated it, got a job offer to go be a credit analyst for JP Morgan, signed it, and then realized I didn't want to do that. I was really lucky to have Charlie O'Donnell, a VC, as a professor, him and Anjali Kumar, who at the time was the chief idea acupuncturist at Google, taught 2 classes on like startups. And that kind of opened my world to tech and innovation and just seemed like way more fun than building spreadsheets.
Definitely. And so what led you down the path? You're on this pretty clear, there was a spreadsheet for it, plan of achieving more and hitting goals and hitting milestones. And then it seems like these 2 professors come in and rock your world a bit. From there, what happened?
Taking a step back, I spent my junior year of college in Beijing. My Taoism professor had done all of his formal training in Sri Lanka. One of my teachers there had done a Fulbright and like threw it on my radar. And a friend from Boy Scouts growing up who was a year ahead of me also did a Fulbright and kept pushing me to apply. So the Fulbright has public application data and you can see how many slots there are. and how many people applied for the last 3 years. And the two least competitive Fulbrights were Sri Lanka and Nepal. And I knew a little bit about Sri Lanka, and I also didn't want to freeze my ass off for a year. So I applied there and got accepted.
I've heard a lot of folks talk about this difference between leading from the head versus leading from the heart. It seems to me like you've been able to strike a balance. It doesn't seem like it's all just spreadsheets. Is there anything there?
Yeah, and I would say it's really easy to connect the dots when you're looking in the past. Going forward, it's really hard to connect the dots. And I definitely have made plenty of decisions in my life based upon the thought of what would be a good story to tell in 10, 20, 30 years? Go be an investment banker, or go spend a year in a former war-torn area teaching English and doing research. It's that seems like it's more fun. My parents at the time weren't necessarily thrilled about having to help me defer my student loans and all that shebang, but we figured it out.
Is there something specific that really keeps you motivated to continuously be not only learning, but teaching others?
I get really bored and just kind of dig into the next thing. And crypto is one of the few industries where I've been digging in for 5 years now, and it's still interesting and moving. Teaching is more just, I like to help other people light the light bulb. There's a reason that I went to teach English for a year overseas and then afterwards fell into education technology. And also teaching can be super clarifying. If I can't explain a concept to my nephew, I probably don't understand it myself. The old Feynman principle.
For sure. That's definitely true. And so when you were over in Sri Lanka teaching English, have you been able to keep in contact with any folks over there? Have you been back?
I have not been back. Sri Lanka's had a very hard go during the pandemic, some of the highest inflation in the world. They ran out of petroleum products as a country. So that was kind of a big deal. And just helping some friends out who were trying to keep afloat.
Totally.
Yeah.
And in terms of travel, that seems to also be a theme that's coming up. We definitely have that in common. Was that always something that was promoted and inspired and supported by friends, family, or were you totally going rogue?
Definitely inspired by friends and family. And my grandparents have been to 80 some odd countries, so they travel a ton. As a kid, got to travel a little bit, did a big family trip when I was 11 to Italy and then to Malta, got to visit some family in Malta, which was super cool. Parents, during high school, helped my brother and I go out to New Mexico to do some backpacking trips, super supportive family. And somehow my mom was still surprised both times when I said I'm moving to China for a year and I'm moving to Sri Lanka for a year.
It's a long way down the open road, but I've got my shoes tied on tight, no fear in my eyesight.
It seems like you have a pretty holistic view of life. How have you developed that, and how have you continued to improve it over time?
It's been spotty at best. After getting back from Sri Lanka, I got to intern with Seth Godin. Then I was the first employee at an ed tech startup where I frankly was working 90 to 100 hour work weeks, was drinking 10 to 12 cups of coffee a day to keep that rolling, and was there for 3 years doing that and kind of hit a wall. I was also in college. I was the person who was carrying 6 classes at a time while running student council, while on the debate team. And again, took me a long time to actually realize that there was life beyond just achieving arbitrary goals set by academic industrial systems. And for a long time, put off dating, put off having fun. And that was less than ideal.
Totally. And where do you think that awareness started to come from? Or conversely, why do you think you went down that path of just work?
I mean, work's super fulfilling, and I genuinely enjoy what I do and find it super impactful. So it's really easy to throw yourself into that. Also, the desire for success, I'll take time off when I hit this financial milestone or when Y happens, and that never happens, and then you never take time off. Therapy can be really helpful in that.
When did therapy cross your path?
First time in college. My school had a program, was super affordable, accessible, which therapy usually is not.
That's definitely been a recurring theme on the show so far.
The smartest people I know, the most successful people I know, all like that's a common thread. They all either are in therapy, have been in therapy, like are open to evolving, growing, and changing. And that's, I think, like, we weren't born in this world to stand in place.
How have you been able to continue to cultivate that headspace of being able to grow?
Some of it comes from relationships. Like my partner is super growth oriented and we push each other and it can be frustrating and hard. A lot of it comes from work, like being in a very cutting edge industry that's rapidly evolving. You have to, by necessity, if you're not constantly engaging in learning, you're falling behind. And then, basic tools like journaling, self-reflection, trying to take time unplugged to actually like give yourself space.
Yeah, that's an important one, especially when you're working in tech.
Yeah, and especially when you work from home and your laptop and computer are always there. In the last 3 months, I've started putting more guardrails around phone. Like wake up and try and get half an hour in before engaging with it, which is fun and challenging.
Sure. Do you have any other tips or tricks, or like you mentioned, those guardrails that really have helped you be able to navigate those boundaries?
Like movement activities like snowboarding and hiking are great ways to unplug and by necessity get outside and be off your phone. Yeah, so like find things that bring you a ton of joy that are analog to balance. Yeah.
So for folks who have no idea where to begin when it comes to this crypto and blockchain world, could you lay on us whether it's definitions, resources, or overall view, 10,000-foot view of the space that you're occupying, both in your personal life with your own crypto obsession and blockchain obsession, but also in your professional life as a chief of staff at a blockchain company?
Yeah, and I love the way that you framed up cryptocurrency and blockchains because they are different and most people are blissfully unaware. It turns out capital B Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, is the thing people talk about on the news all the time. Bitcoin's worth 19,000. It's worth 20,000. It's going to $1 billion to $1 trillion. Is different than lowercase b Bitcoin, the blockchain. And Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, runs on Bitcoin, the blockchain. And you can do other things with the blockchain aside from talk about the price of Bitcoin. We're still at day one of this industry. The vast majority of the world is off-chain, but it's pretty clear to me that in the not too distant future, the vast majority of the world will be on-chain, just like 10 years ago, most of the world was offline, and today most of the world is online. And that's going to enable a whole new host of behaviors, patterns, economic activity. And we are just on the precipice of seeing, I think, a pretty massive change in the culture driven by changes in technology.
Totally. And do you have any info you could share on the history of blockchain and why it first started and what you think the future could look like in a perhaps more utopian world than what we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, more solar punk world, if you will. And I am such a huge fan of the solar punk genre, and it's no surprise to me that solar punk, which is a very optimistic, futuristic view of a world where technology saves us from climate change and scales, is being embraced by a lot of crypto elites and leaders in the space. Like there's a big Venn diagram overlap there. But to take a step back, Bitcoin, digital cash has been an obsession for many entrepreneurs for many decades. Like, look at what Elon was doing before he was at PayPal, and he required every early employee of PayPal to read Cryptonomicon, the Neil Stephenson novel, which was this story of digital gold and a token, and like a lot of the predecessors there. But then Bitcoin itself actually came about in response to the '08 financial crisis. And initially, there were two groups that grabbed Bitcoin with diametrically opposing political views. The libertarians, who wanted us to return to the gold standard and viewed crypto as digital gold and sovereign money that could not be inflated. and utopians who thought that Bitcoin could sort of save the world and be a more equitable distribution force, and i.e. the Occupy movement at the time. And the first block of Bitcoin, i.e. the Genesis block, actually references a New York Times article around the '08 financial crisis. So was definitively launched in response to that event. And it was super novel and interesting, but there really wasn't much you could do with it until Ethereum came around, which invented the idea of smart contracts, so programmable money. And anyone who's listening to this that wants to dive deeper, read the Ethereum white paper, read the Bitcoin white paper. They're not that long. Skip the math sections if those are intimidating, because you don't really need to understand those to understand the technology. And the idea, like, Lindsey, you and I could enter into a smart contract where it's like, well, say you own farmland in Kansas and you want to insure it in case the weather drops below 40 degrees over this certain date range. Like, you could program that into a smart contract, call the weather.com API, and I could lock some money up into it. And if weather drops below X degrees, automatically pay Lindsey Y. Like, it's pretty easy statement to write out.
Definitely. Do you think it's been intentional or unintentional that a lot of the language and promotion around, whether it's blockchain, it's crypto, it's any of the apps, any of the wallets that are being promoted, it seems a little bit more elite than not?
We're still very much at the protocol level phase. So like, crypto is mostly crypto people building crypto tools for crypto people. Do you know what SMTP protocol is?
I don't.
Did you send an email today?
Sure, a few.
Yeah, right. So you used SMTP protocol, and it's the open source protocol that enables me to send a note from Gmail to you in iCloud that you can forward to someone in Outlook. And like, if you read the spec for SMTP protocol, it's pretty nerdy and like unusable. But then you go and use Gmail and it's like, oh yeah, like this is life changing and it's awesome. And we're still building the protocols for blockchain. So it's still like, we haven't built the Gmail client quite yet. Like, maybe you could argue Coinbase is that, but I would say we're not quite there.
Okay. Interesting. I've dabbled a bit hopping on Coinbase and attempting to learn a bit about it.
Crypto's unique in technological revolutions, and there's a great book called Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital by Carlota Perez that traces the boom and bust cycles of technology that starts with like the steam engine and the railroads and goes up to the Web 1 boom. And Web 3 is the first time where the liquidity phase has ever predated the utility phase of a new technology. And for a long time, the coolest innovation in crypto is that you could launch tokens that could be sold and have a market cap. And it turns out that a lot of the ICOs, the initial coin offerings from 2017, are just starting to get their products online in meaningful ways in the last 18 months. Like Filecoin, one of the largest ICOs of the era, still hasn't launched to mainnet yet. And they're getting there, and they're like producing, but it turns out building infrastructure and protocols is really hard and takes a lot of concerted effort.
One of the interesting things that I've heard around the building of infrastructure in the Web3 space and the crypto space and blockchain in general is, how can we be more equitable in that? And how do we create these new worlds, whether it's physical, not physical, meta, however we're defining it? How can we imagine a world in which those are more equitable than the universe we're in now?
Or how could we imagine a world where the financial system is regenerative?
Even better.
And to steal, this is a meme that's become really popular in crypto circles, is refi, regenerative finance, and the idea that baked into the core protocol are like funding for public goods. And defining what a public good is sort of a nebulous term, but my friend Zach is launching a new NFT lending protocol called Nifty Apes. And actually baked into the core of the protocol will be some percentage of all transaction fees are going to go to public goods. And initially it will just be to develop the Ethereum network. But I don't know, maybe they'll start, like, they'll take a page from Stripe Climate and start funding carbon offsets. Maybe they could do something like let the users of the protocol denote where that refi goes, but the refi is a core tenet of the protocol.
Interesting. That, I mean, hey, sounds good to me.
Yeah, and like taking a step back, a lot of people are like, "Oh, crypto, like what are you doing here?" And 25% of global GDP is consumed by financial services. And if all Web3 does is make that 5%, 10%, 20% more efficient, we're unlocking trillions of dollars of capital that can be deployed in new and interesting ways. So, like, yeah, hey, global hunger, big problem. What if we had an extra $1 trillion a year to deal with that? Yeah,
totally. And I've heard it spoken about in a couple different ways. One of which I appreciated was the original, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, the original creation of Bitcoin was so that folks could have access to currency, whether or not they had their own bank accounts, whether or not they had access to a bank, whether or not they had anything, just because of the fact that you can, in token form, have something that is so small in terms of fractionalization that it's less than a penny.
Yeah, anyone anywhere in the world with an internet connection can access a blockchain system. That is part of being an open public blockchain network. Anybody can read the ledger, anybody can write to the ledger. And yeah, like Bitcoin is infinitely divisible, which is why companies like Square or now Block are built investing in things like the Lightning Network, where, Lindsey, if I wanted to say tip you for this show and send you 10 cents, I could do that on the Lightning Network, and that transaction would be fast, cheap, and make sense.
What are all of the fees associated with, I believe it's on the Ethereum network, and gas fees? I have, and for context, I have a handful of musicians that I work with, one of which is an artist that goes by Verite, who has made leaps and bounds in the Web3 space. Again, still have a limited understanding and slowly but surely chipping away at it, like many listeners, I'm sure. And so watching the way that she, as an independent artist, has been able to really maintain ownership of her work. She's gone as far as fractionalizing pieces of music that she has and selling those to fans, which is huge because not only is she able to get the capital that she deserves as an artist, having put, heart and soul into creating a piece of work, but that actual exchange of value is there rather than the roughly $4,000 per 1 million streams that an artist may get on Spotify if they're lucky.
Yeah. So I want to dig in and talk more about music, but you asked a question about gas, and gas is a terrible name, but it's the one we're stuck with right now. Gas is just a network fee. And if you take a step back and think about like email protocol, how many spam emails do you get all the time? Quite a few, because it's free to send an email. Well, like imagine somebody sending you spam transactions to your bank account because it's free to send a transaction. So that was part of the initial design, but also to become part of the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM or the Ethereum blockchain, you actually have to pay the network fee because there's transactional costs, like computation costs. There's hardware and software costs where like, you have to run the transaction. And the more complex the transaction, the higher the fee because it takes up more space and doesn't allow for other transactions. And keep in mind, Ethereum, the gas fee is a competitive marketplace. So, Lindsey, if you're willing to pay $20 right now to get on the Ethereum blockchain, and I come in and say I'm willing to pay $1,000, and then somebody else comes in and says they're willing to pay $5,000, and that ratcheting up actually happens all the time. And to talk a little bit about Block Native and some of the work we do, we're experts in pre-chain transactions, and we build really specialized Ethereum infrastructure. And one of the cool things our platforms enabled us to do is have the most accurate Ethereum gas estimation. And it works because we inspect every transaction that's waiting to become part of the blockchain. And we index their gas prices, and our data science team pumps out new models to tell you what price you need to pay.
During 2020, you and your now husband made the decision to get married. So while you're here, I would love to dive in a bit about your thoughts around the status quo of marriage equality and what can be done to ensure that queer folks like ourselves don't completely have our rights stripped away in the not so distant future.
We got engaged the day New York City went into lockdown, convinced a friend to come and take some photos. We were going to go out to a dinner afterwards, and then all of the restaurants were closed. So we just went home and got takeout. When we got engaged, we're like, we're going to wait. We want to do a wedding celebration with our friends and family. And then things with the election cycle were getting pretty weird. And then RBG died. And when RBG died, the Supreme Court started calling Obergefell into question. And we went and got a marriage license and eloped pretty quickly after that because I wanted to just lock down the fact that we could get married. And now we're coming up on our 2-year wedding anniversary and pretty sure we're good for that one. Our 3-year wedding anniversary, actually not so sure we'll still legally be married in the eyes of the federal government. The eyes of the state government is even more blurry because we live in Colorado where there's an existing constitutional amendment that makes gay marriage illegal. It was overturned by a Supreme Court decision in the state of Colorado. And it's unclear if the Supreme Court overturning Obergefell will also overturn that. I feel pretty good living in a state where if my marriage is overturned, my governor's marriage would also be overturned. But it puts in a weird gray area. Some states have also said that they won't recognize other states' marriages. So if you and your partner were traveling in Florida or in Texas, you actually need to get more legal paperwork in place, especially if you have a child, because only further complicates things. And especially if one parent is a DNA giver and the other isn't, it gets real wild real quick.
It is. And that is something that we've talked about because if we were married, it would not only be gay marriage, it then checks the box of interracial marriage. And then to your point, having a child involved. I mean, we've talked about, as a recovering van lifer, I have obviously spent a lot of time on the road and just thinking about that and thinking through that and thinking, okay, hey, the handful of trips I've driven across the country, whether it's with my partner or entire family, there's some places that we drive through that if God forbid something ever happened, we'd be shit out of luck.
Yeah. And hey, moving to Colorado was not an accident. Landing in a state that's fairly progressive and fairly protective of families in whatever shape they come from. And just frustrating that we're regressing back to this because I went to my first gay marriage when it was legalized at the federal level. I think that was 2015, was that? Close friend got married right around Christmas and invited 20 people to attend, and they had been together they just celebrated their 30th last year. So they'd been together for 20 plus years, but couldn't get married because it wasn't an option for them. I have some libertarian views and I generally think less government is better. And the idea that the government can tell me how to structure my family is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, I would second that.
Or that others' religious beliefs can start to infringe upon my rights. Where's the establishment clause come into play? I have a list of legal documents that have been recommended to me by a lawyer. We'll caveat by saying I am not a lawyer. Don't play one on the internet. But if you are in a queer relationship, you should be aware that you might need to spend a few $1,000s getting legal docs put in place to provide you the protections you have today. The court could rule before the end of the year on Obergefell. They might rule on it next year. They might not rule on it at all. It's kind of the fun part of the Supreme Court. You never really know. But the current court's been, pretty explicit.
Yes, we will definitely link that. Before we wrap up, the 2 questions that we ask every awesome human that comes on the show. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And what is the worst piece of advice that you've ever received?
Mentor Seth Godin once was giving me some career advice and was really encouraging me to be bold because it's way easier to take a big stand and take a big bet and have that blow up than to like take a bunch of small bets and have them sort of be mediocre. The worst piece of advice, my grandmother told me not to move to Denver, and she was questioning whether or not they have buildings here, which was just hysterical. But like, I don't know. I think most people are not deliberate about where they live and why they live there, and be intentional about designing a life that you want. And if you have the financial and economic mobility, go do it.
And I am going to tack on another question because it fits that same vein of thinking about lifestyle design and really creating the life that you want to have, which is truly at the heart and soul of every conversation that we have on this podcast. We are not all going to get married at, 25 and pop out a couple of kids and have a white picket fence, et cetera, and work 9 to 5 and all of these things. Really, the whole purpose is to figure out and bring more to the mainstream level of folks like yourself who have gone against the grain. And so are there any, whether it's daily tips, tricks, habits, anything like that you practice that have really contributed to being able to put yourself in a position to be able to create that life that you have a vision for?
I think a lot of it, I just ask a lot of questions, and sometimes this infuriates my partner because I just dig into stuff, sometimes like stupid things that I don't really need to dig into. I do. And sorry, babe, I love you. And I think most people just don't question, why do we do the things? Like, why are we doing this way? Why have we always done it this way? I will give a quick story. I've now officiated 12 weddings for friends and family. And like, I think a lot about weddings, and I think a lot about like, why are they structured like this? What's it actually for? Who's it for? Why are we trying to do this thing? And I was having a conversation with my sister-in-law ahead of her wedding, and she was like, well, I really want to see everyone. I was like, well, you're going to have 150 people. You're going to have a 5-hour affair. That's 30 seconds per person during your wedding. Do you really want to see people? Because like, weddings turnout are not a good way to see people if you're the bride and groom. So like, what's it for? Who's it for? Why are we doing this? Like, just ask why over and over, and you might lead to a new answer.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
This was super fun. Incredible
information. I definitely learned quite a few new fun facts about Bitcoin and blockchain. So I'm hoping our listeners do as well. Thanks again, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lindsey. Appreciate it. And would love to just like do a coffee Zoom and shoot the shit sometime. You're awesome.
Thank you for listening to The Cost of the Status Quo and learning the wisdom, stories, and ideas that will have you feeling inspired and ready to take on the world. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to share, rate, and review. It means the world to me and the team putting it all together. If you're looking for more information, you can find us at costofthestatusquo.com or on Instagram at costofthestatusquo. If you've got any questions or curiosity about me, you can find me at lindseylerner.com. That's LINDSEYLERNER.com or on Instagram at Lindsey Lerner. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have an awesome day.